Hi, I'm Charles with Anycap. The story begins as we see that a guy named Melos is completely exhausted. He is approached by a man that points out that Melos parties and drinks more than anyone. He questions if Melos is really considering not going back somewhere and if he really plans to abandon the person waiting for him with the king. Melos is shocked to hear that this man knows about this secret situation he is in, but the man explains that there's no time for questions and it's time for Melos to run. A flashback then shows that Melos had been restrained, and he explained to the king that he was going to slay him because of his tyrannical rule. Of course, the king was furious, so he ordered him to be killed, but another man arrived to ask that Melos be allowed to see his young sister before he was executed. The king refused, but the man offered to stay there in his place to assure that Melos wouldn't run away, and if he did, then he could be killed instead. Back to the present, Melos tries to explain that he would never abandon his friend, and only hesitated for a moment after seeing his sister's happy face. The man explains that this is exactly how the story is supposed to go anyway, but Melos has no clue what he means by story. Melos then wonders how the man knew all the details of the agreement, but the man doesn't explain and simply states that it's always simpler for someone on the outside to understand what's really going on. Melos is furious to not get an answer, but the man changes the subject to point out that Melos is completely to blame for being so emotional and attempting to execute the king. This only makes Melos more upset, so he storms off. Moments later, the journey stops as they come across a valley. Melos dramatically states that just when he has accepted his fate and decided to return, a raging torrent will keep him from doing so. The man shocks Melos as he uses something called a cloud thread to get across, but disappoints Melos when he explains that he can't use it to help him get across. The man states that it's because Melos is about to give it his all to try to cross the river himself, but Melos points out that he will surely die if he tries to swim across. The man forces Melos in, but he can only cry for help and is shocked to see that the man disappeared. Melos eventually manages to crawl out, but soon finds himself being robbed. Melos is ready to give up as he apologizes to his friend for not being able to save him, but finds a canteen nearby. He replenishes himself and begins to run once more as he vows to keep his promise to return for his dear friend. Melos finally arrives and the king wonders what he is doing there. Melos explains that he has returned to save his friend Selene, but the king asks Melos to question if Selene is really his friend. Melos is certain he is, but then has a memory that makes him realize that Selene actually betrayed him. The king pushes him further, explaining that Selene the betrayer isn't worth saving, and urges Melos to kill him with his own hands. Melos takes the sword and the king rejoices as he states that this world will disappear, ending in a story of betrayal. Melos begins the execution, but is quickly stopped by the man from earlier, who explains that the king is changing the story a little too much. The king is shocked and the man explains that there is nothing worse than changing a story that should end happily into a tragedy. Melos is then shocked to see the king's army turn into something called taints, and the man asks Melos to stay back as he eliminates them. Melos marvels at the man's strength and the man explains that he is simply an author. The king turns into a monster himself as he vows not to let the author interfere, and Melos must be saved. The author can't manage to save him a second time though, and Melos takes a hit from the monstrous king. Melos then strangely wakes up in a hospital room where he is told that his name is actually Daze. Selene is the one talking to him, but he explains that his name is Sato, and he is Daze's teacher. Daze begins to remember some things and tells Sato that he really wanted the Akutagawa prize. Sato believes that Daze's work was worthy of winning the first Akutagawa prize, but he explains that unfortunately he wasn't the only judge. Daze is furious that Sato encouraged him by believing in him only to watch him fail, and Sato realizes now that Daze took him not winning as a betrayal. Daze states that because of Sato he can't believe in anyone anymore, but Sato is quick to point out that Daze must take responsibility. He tells Daze that his work is completely his own, and he should never forget that. Daze then finds himself as Melos once more and demands that the author explain everything. The world around them is beginning to fall apart, but the author is glad to see that Daze is beginning to remember. He explains that they are actually inside a book that Daze wrote, and its title is Run Melos. The man explains that whenever an author enters a book, they forget everything about it. He goes on to say that the world is filled with books, but the taints only want to destroy them. When the taints set their sight on a book, the soul of the author who wrote it is trapped within. They then change the contents of the book before destroying it. Daze can hardly understand what's going on, but shocks the author when he shows that he intends to defeat the Taints. Daze sees that his teacher is in trouble, as the author explains that the only way to destroy the Taints is to lead the story to its proper conclusion. The theme of Run Melos is belief, so Daze must believe in someone else in the end, and his belief must be justified. Daze's attempt to rescue Sado is stopped by the king, but the author steps in. Daze gets hurt in the process, but the author assures him by revealing that an author can't die inside their book. The king is quick to state that the blue-haired man can still die, but the blue-haired author shows that the king isn't nearly strong enough to accomplish this task. The king mutates even more, however, and the author can't help but state how much of a problem that will be. Daze finally makes it to his teacher, and he explains how he felt betrayed. He realizes now that he only has himself to blame, and his teacher was only trying to encourage him to work harder, as he believed that he could accomplish much more. Daze's belief is restored as he continues his role as Melos, and apologizes to his friend for making him wait so long. We then watch as the author's fight with the transformed king continues, and he explains that the story of trust has been completed. The king refuses to accept defeat, but Daze shows up and transforms himself as he prepares to fight. The king is defiant, but Daze shows the difference in their strength instantly. Daze thanks the author for helping, but the man points out that he wasn't helping, he was just protecting the book. They say their goodbyes as the author leaves the book, but Daze is shocked to find the author standing next to him once more. He reveals that authors are actually released from their books after defeating the Taints, and Daze can't believe he embarrassed himself with his heartfelt goodbye. Daze is taken to the director's room and sees that there is no one there, but is shocked when a cat introduces himself as the director. The director explains that Daze is now an astral being, a phantasm, created from the image of Daze. It is explained that his teacher in the book was also a phantasm of his real teacher. The best way to destroy the book Run Melos was for Melos to abandon his friend, so his teacher's phantasm was there to allow that to happen. Daze is amazed to hear that the Taints are capable of learning all this, and the director explains that they have no understanding of why the Taints want to destroy books so badly. Regardless, their job is to stop them, and only authors who created literature can defeat the Taints. The director is certain that Daze will help them, as he won't stand by when literature is in peril, but Daze surprises them by stating that he doesn't actually care. The director asks the author to encourage him, and Daze is shocked to hear his name is Akutagawa. Daze is at a loss for words, and Akutagawa formally introduces himself as the man that the reward Daze wanted is named after. Sometime later, two other authors named Shusei and Chuya watch as Daze mopes around. Daze thinks about how he can't go on living surrounded by the endless number of books, and thinks about how he must apologize to Akutagawa for having to leave immediately. Daze has grown tired of climbing up the seemingly endless staircases and gets Chuya to admit that he lied about there being an exit. He decides that he should just end his own life by jumping off the ledge, but Chuya mocks him for being overly dramatic, just like in his real life, where he would want to end his life over romantic problems. Chuya knocks him off the ledge, but the director arrives to explain that they are only souls, so they can't die there. Chuya then explains that he actually isn't sure if there is an exit, as he went through the same thing when he first got there, and couldn't find the way out. Another author named Tosan explains that there are many doors around, but none lead to the outside, so when he first got there, he tried to leave through the ceiling. As he endured the pain from his fall, he wrote a poem about the scene he saw as he fell. The director states that there is no exit, and none of them even understand what their roles as reincarnated authors even is. Daze proudly states that he doesn't even know what that means, and the director continues his explanation to the helpless bunch. He reveals that even if there was an exit, they would have nowhere to go. They are all souls modeled after authors of the past, and the only place they can maintain human form is in this library. Daze is then shocked to hear that the rest of them weren't saved from books like him. Instead, they were called directly there in the form of reincarnation. Akutagawa arrives to explain that the person who called them there is called the Alchemist. There is clearly tension between him and Tosan, so Tosan leaves as they have never gotten along. The director explains that the Alchemist is simply someone that exists to fight the Taints, but nothing more can be said. Afterwards, Akutagawa explains that he has no memories of his life as the real Akutagawa, and all mentions of the books he wrote only make him realize that he can't remember why he wrote them. He explains that this is his reason for simply moving forward. If he is able to save someone who knew Akutagawa well, then he hopes that it might help him remember who he is. Akutagawa sympathizes with Daze since Daze was told to fight simply because he is an author. Just then, they sense that someone has just returned from a delve into a book, and they discover that it's someone named Saku. Saku is in critical danger, but this confuses Daze as he thought that authors couldn't die. Shusei explains, however, that wounds inflicted in a book are different. The taints have the power to destroy an author's very soul, so wounds received when delving are carved into the body. Daze wonders why Saku was sent on such a dangerous mission alone, and it's explained that only the authors called by the tainted book can delve into it. Saku isn't in good enough shape to return to the book, but they are quickly running out of time, so Akutagawa offers to go. He was helping Daze when the book was tainted, and he is the only one that hasn't tried to delve into it yet. Everyone is then shocked as Daze demands that he try to go as well. The author of that book is still trapped inside, and he wants to do what he can to help. They prepare to delve as Akutagawa explains that when all the pages turn black, the book will disappear from this world. The two are luckily accepted to delve into the book, and the director points out that they have very little time. Furthermore, whoever they are up against was able to defeat Saku, so they better be prepared. Delving isn't so easy, however, as Akutagawa must warn Daze to focus, but it's too late and they are separated. Akutagawa arrives alone and thinks about how he should have explained that delving requires intense concentration. Daze finds himself alone in front of a tree but realizes that something isn't right, and he tries to run away. He just ends up falling into another area where he is met by a woman and her guards. He explains that he wants to head to the most populated area as that is where he will most likely find his comrade. Daze explains that he was simply traveling when he strangely became terrified by some cherry blossoms. The woman explains that he is not the only one, as when someone travels underneath the cherry blossoms in full bloom, they go mad. Elsewhere, Akutagawa is familiar with the book they are in and is concerned that Daze might get trapped by the story's core. A woman bumps into him and takes his recommendation to buy a red comb. Back to Daze, the woman insists that he spend the night at her place since he seems to know many things she does not. She wants to learn from him, so Daze accepts her invitation. Back at the library, Saku has woken up but is told that he needs to go back to bed. Saku is told that he is far too injured to delve back into the book, but he insists as he explains that the person they are supposed to be saving, named Ango, is extremely dangerous at the moment. Back inside the book, Daze explains that he can teach the woman all kinds of things, but is shocked to see that she has been cut in half. All her guards are eliminated in the same way, and Daze is horrified to see that Ango is to blame. Nearby, we see that the woman Akutagawa interacted with uses the comb she bought to comb some hair. Back near Daze, Ango demands Daze's head and attacks him. Daze pleads for him to stop, but his words go unheard as Ango continues his attack, and eventually disarms Daze. Daze is completely helpless now as Ango prepares to land the final blow. Before he can do so, however, Akutagawa arrives just in time to stop him. Ango explains that he was only after the woman's head, so they agree to part ways. In the library, Tosan explains that this book is Ango's greatest work, and everyone who reads it has their own interpretation of it. He begins to explain his interpretation as we see the bandit who is the protagonist of the book. The bandit mercilessly hunts down a traveler and ends his life only to find that he didn't really have anything worth taking. We watch the bandit live his life as Tosan explains that the bandit had everything he could want up in the mountains. If he ever wanted anything, he could just steal it, and anyone who passed through the forests and mountains were his prey. However, even a man like him had one thing he feared, and that was the cherry blossom trees. He didn't know why, but he always knew he would find out someday. One day, the bandit would find the woman that changed everything, and he instantly stated that she was now his wife. He was willing to do anything for her. Never having known what it felt like to want something so badly, he instantly became her puppet, even after learning her true nature. The bandit would go on to slaughter a couple for the woman, as she collected their heads. She didn't want the heads to be lonely, so she ordered the bandit to get more for her. She insisted, so the man wandered the capital in search of a head to sever to fulfill her desires. He would soon bring her another head, and the woman would then come up with a story for them. The man's head would eventually fall in love with the new woman's head. His wife would eventually find out though, and the man dies a very painful death. After several of these instances, the man would finally come out and say that he has grown tired of beheading people. She tries to convince him that this is the way things should be, but he refuses to accept that. The woman manipulates him further by offering to go back to the mountains with him, and making him realize that he will only eventually lose his mind to the cherry blossoms and kill her. The bandit instantly changes his mind and vows to stay with her forever. We then see that Daze and Akutagawa are watching them, and Daze insists that he go and defeat the woman. Akutagawa explains that they can't since they need to bring the book to its original conclusion. In the original, the bandit grows tired of the woman and tries to go back to the mountains. But right now, he's afraid to go back. Akutagawa explains that it's almost as if he knows what happens, and Daze wonders what that is. Akutagawa is surprised to see that Daze hasn't read the book and decides that they need to hurry up and get the story going. The next day, the bandit returns to find that the woman has been captured by Akutagawa, and Daze explains that they will be taking her. If he wants her back, then he will have to come to them, but they will be waiting under the cherry blossom tree. Daze gets a little payback and can't help but think that they might actually be the bad guys. In the library, Chuya is surprised to find Saku attempting to delve back into the book. He tries to stop him, but he can't, as Saku is determined to save his friend since he feels he and Daze are to blame for him being in trouble. A brief memory shows that the three of them were friends in the past, and they once discussed the true nature of man. Ango told him about his idea for a book with a bandit hero who was invincible because of how happy he was just living the only life he knew. He had always been alone, so he didn't even know what it meant to be lonely, as that was just his life. Ango explained that the bandit would eventually fall in love, and Saku correctly predicted that this meant that the man would stop being invincible. Daze wondered what would happen if the woman died, and Saku once again correctly predicted that the man would fall into loneliness for the first time in his life. Ango wanted to depict a man's fall, but now he has unfortunately become that man. Inside the book, Daze thinks that the woman is inhuman, but Akutagawa explains that she is just another person, but her values are far different than theirs. However, the woman instantly recognizes them as Delvers and begins to mutate. She is clearly the one that tainted the book and begins her relentless attack on our heroes. They do well to fight her, but Ango shows up and states that he can't lose her no matter what, as he doesn't want to be alone. The woman tells him how much she loves him and commands him to defend her. Akutagawa attempts to explain that in the story, the woman becomes a monster and the bandit kills her himself. The only way for this situation to end is for him to defeat her himself. These words reach Ango as he begins to remember who he is, but the woman injures him gravely. Ango's memories have come back, however, and he explains how the bandit kills the woman and dies knowing true loneliness. This is the beautiful life of a fallen man, but he is terrified of being alone. He remembers how both Daze and Saku both left him just 2 years after they drank that night, and he doesn't want to lose anyone else. Daze tries to encourage him, but the woman prepares to land the final blow. Luckily for everyone, Saku arrives just in time to save him. The friends are finally reunited, and Daze's words finally reach him as he no longer fears loneliness. The woman attempts a powerful attack, but she is struck down, and we see that Ango has returned to himself. The woman tries to convince him once more as she reminds him of the promise he made to stay together forever, but he simply tells her to shut up and eliminates her. Ango now admires the cherry blossom tree as they are now the light that illuminates him. He can now see that there is nothing around him and now understands that he is lonely. He can now accept this as he disappears, and Akutagawa states that this is the proper ending to Ango's story. The three authors return to the library where they are greeted by Chuya, and Ango joins them soon after. Nearby, the director reports to a crystal how the delve was a success, and Ango will be joining them. He points out how understandable it is that Daze and Saku were called into Ango's book since they were friends, but can't understand why Akutagawa was. That was extremely strange to him, and he wonders if Akutagawa may hold the key to this battle. Thanks for watching part 1. 3,000 likes and I'll know you want a part 2.